introduce your committee and your colleagues, and then go ahead and present your report. That would be great.
Certainly. Thank you. We're happy to be here tonight. I'd like to introduce Dan Amanoff. You all know him. He's from the Mason District. He's our vice chair, has been for many, many years. Charlie Hookey is our secretary from the Braddock District. And then in the audience, we have Ian Kelly from Springfield and Howard Pearlstein from Hunter Mill. And we have this year 4 departing members. 2 are with us tonight. One is Kristen Hyatt from Sully. And Kristen has been with us since 2012. She's been out with the parents a lot, particularly over in the western part of the state, but with PTAs and also working on our 21st century school designs. So we will miss Kristen when she departs. This is her last event with us. Also with us is Alan Griffith. And Alan, you must stand up. Alan has been here since day one as the Fairfax City rep. And I think he has really shared a lot of insights with us as a former school board member and politician from Fairfax City, so he's really helped us a lot over the years, and we will miss him greatly. But Fairfax City has been very good in their selection of his replacement. We have with us tonight Katie Herman. Stand up, Katie. Katie's a certified facility manager, and she has geographical information systems and school safety expertise. So we are absolutely delighted to have her on our committee. There will be 2 replacements coming forward to you at the Thursday meeting that the CPDC is projecting that we add into FPAC to replace 2 of the members. We're still looking for someone from the Lee District. For the agenda. So that's our agenda real quick. As we were putting together our annual report, the 23rd school shooting in 2018 occurred. And school safety was not one of our areas of study this year or part of our charge, but obviously it's a very high priority item for all of us. And so we felt like we would be remiss if we did not encourage the school board to take action from a facility perspective, which is our perspective in terms of safety and security. So what we're suggesting is that some additional assessments be done. I know that there's been a couple, one for the state and then one that the school system has conducted, but there are others that are actually more in depth from a facility perspective that we think would be beneficial. And then coming out of those assessments, you would want to prioritize what needs to be done. Funding is always an issue, but as important as all of our other facility recommendations are, we think that some money should go to this facility safety issue, and that depending on what those priorities show, that's what we should be doing. And then where we need to, we should seek additional funding from the county. It's not going to be cheap to try to do some of the things that we have to do to secure our schools. Some of you, I think, were yesterday at the meeting on school safety, and you heard an anecdotal story about Mosby Woods School and a parent just walking in and being able to wander around the school. So there are things like that that we hear anecdotally too, and that's why we're encouraging some additional security assessments be done. Finally, yes, we're doing security improvements when we do renovations, but the schools that have just been renovated are going to be 35 years until they're renovated again, and we don't want them to wait that long for their next security update, so we really need to look across the system. As for our annual report itself, we've organized it so the executive summary highlights and prioritizes the 23 recommendations as groups of recommendations. And then for each part of our annual charge, we have the significant findings, the recommendations, and an appendix with the details of our findings in it. Report also reports on our activities and our meetings and retreat, committee participation, community outreach, and suggestions for next year's annual charge. We separately submitted the semi-annual report so that we would not duplicate that information in this report. You recall we focused heavily on renovations and maintenance, how long the renovation cycle is and how important it is to do maintenance in the interim. So our school board charge for this year covered the areas of long-range vision, including major maintenance with the capacity requirements in the CIP, energy savings, and prior FPAC recommendations. In the area of the long-range vision, the one thing that we really wanted to get the school system to focus on is thinking about how teaching and learning is going to change for the 21st century. And the schools that we are renovating today will not be touched again for 30, 35 years. And things could change very dramatically with technology and other things that are happening in our society between now and then. And we think that some flexibility should probably be introduced into our school designs so that we can take advantage of new learning technologies and methodologies. In the energy saving arena, we're suggesting that when the current synergistic contract ends, that the school system consider using a Virginia State Energy Performance Contract, which helps with some actual changes to facilities to improve energy savings rather than focusing as much on behavioral changes and so forth that's been done under the current program. The other important thing that we'd like to bring to your attention is an opportunity to work with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, for a demonstration project. And that could be a really cool thing for the county to do. So we have some folks on our committee that are aware of how to make those kind of contacts, should that be of interest to the school system. On prior recommendations, we looked at the 69 recommendations that we've brought to you up through last year's annual report. And we're happy to say of those, 30 of them have been implemented, 16 have been partially implemented, and 23 remain. Now, all 23 of those are not majorly important, but there are some things there that we wanted to bring to your attention. Some of them are to begin planning for the Western High School, limit the boundary changes to severe overcrowding until we figure out what kind of impact the Western High School is going to have, focus on 21st century teaching and learning requirements and get those into the ed specs, integrate the budget and the schedule of maintenance with the renovations and the new construction that's covered in the CIP, provide additional funding for major maintenance, and then the recommendations that we brought last year and at our mid-year report are still high on the list. Those are most of the ones that haven't been done yet because they were just recently made. In the next steps, when we presented our semi-annual report in February, one of the next steps was you asked for an explanation of what we referred to as the CICP, which is a comprehensive investment capital plan. That's actually a plan being developed by the FTS staff in the maintenance area to look at the capital requirements for maintenance. Our suggestion is that the capital requirements for maintenance be included and integrated with what's in the CIP in terms of capital requirements. So in looking at the plans that we have, under the planning, design, and construction area, we have the CIP as a product. In the facilities management area, they're working on an asset management plan, and coming out of that would be what they're calling the CICP, which is their capital requirements for maintenance. And in the safety and security group, we have the security assessments and safety assessments that are being done. So what we'd like to see is that the facility changes that are required from the safety and security group be integrated with the asset management plan, and that the capital requirements for asset management, that's maintenance and ongoing repair, be included in the CIP as part of the capital requirements for the school system. Then you have the whole picture of what is being changed over time, what needs to be improved, what needs to be added, and what needs to be built new, instead of the focus as the CIP is today just on renovations and new construction. In our charge for next year, we're suggesting that you have us work with staff and build on our previous work in the long-range vision and getting that into the capital planning process. And we think we've got a great start with Jessica Gillis as part of the staff. She has a comprehensive planning perspective, and that's really going to help us, I think, with the development of a comprehensive facilities plan. We want to also work on identifying major maintenance and asset management requirements. So how do we get all of those done, identified, prioritized, and into a plan? Oversee or work with the staff on safety and security assessments, and develop a CIP that has capacity and major maintenance integrated, as I just described, and shows an impact of what the funding limitations do to the whole picture of maintenance and asset management and capital planning. And finally, to work with staff on updating the boundary policies and processes. We think it's been a while since those have been reviewed and updated, and Jessica and her staff have been working hard on doing some research for you, and we would like to work with them as they update those policies. In summary, the areas that we think that FCPS should focus on are to conduct facility security assessment and implementations, combine the major maintenance requirements into the CIP, initiate activities around the new Western High School to prepare for significant boundary changes, and finally, that the school board focus on facilities through the CPDC so that you can ensure that we have a long-range focus for facilities planning, and to ensure implementation of the FPAC recommendations that the board accepts. So, we're reporting you tonight on several years of recommendations. There may be some in that have not been implemented that are important for the board, and the CPDC can certainly help us with that. And finally, it would provide an opportunity for less formal dialogue with FPAC and with the FTS staff so that school board members can get an insight into facilities issues. We want to thank Jeff and his staff for all the great support throughout the year, and especially we appreciate the regular participation and open sharing on the part of Kevin Sneed and Jessica Gillis, including their participation in our retreat. And Dr. Braban, we really want to thank you for that help. We appreciate the opportunity to present our annual report, and we'll be happy to respond to questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we begin, the school board has received the preliminary safety report from staff, and I'm assuming that you have seen that? Yes. Okay.
We have. Our concern, we know that safety and security is people, process, and technology and facilities. It's all of that together. Our focus really is on the facility piece, and we felt it was really light in that area, that there's a lot more that could be done. And when we hear anecdotes like the one that was made public yesterday, we need to address those and make sure that we're dealing with them. So yes, we saw that. We have not seen the state report that's required for security because that's close hold and not public information, but I understand it's been shared with the board.
Okay, thank you. All right, we are open for questions, comments. Ms. Evans, Ms. Schultz.
Well, thank you so much for your thorough and excellent report. Actually, that's a perfect segue because I was going to ask you for if you'd had enough of an opportunity to review the staff recommendations, if you support them, if you think that there are other things we should be doing, or have you not had an opportunity to really thoroughly discuss the specifics?
The last.
The last, all right.
We agree with what's there.
Okay.
And from what we've seen, just looking at that and not talking with staff about it, it looks like there's other areas that probably should be addressed. And I've talked with Tom Vaccarello about working with us in the fall and bringing us up to date on what he's doing and what he sees as other opportunities where we can help.
Well, that might be something that you would want to have a thorough conversation about that. You know, one of the proposals is to have significantly more surveillance cameras in our schools, and quite a few other things as well, and some things that they looked at but didn't recommend. And so I for one, as one board member, would be interested in FPAC's take on the effectiveness of safety and security and those recommendations. On the boundary changes and your recommendation here, this seems like a departure. Perhaps I'm reading it improperly. This seems like a departure from your recommendations in past years in terms of using capacity better rather than building out. Is this a departure, or is it not, in terms of using our you want to put a hold? Are you talking about putting a hold on boundary changes just out west or throughout the county?
When you look at the potential impact of a new high school and what the ripple effect could be throughout the county, almost the whole county, I mean, it's going to cause a lot of high school boundaries to shift, which could have impact on pyramids and pyramid alignments. So what we're suggesting is that we start to look at what that might be before we start doing things like getting rid of attendance islands or just doing some nice to have boundary changes as opposed to ones that are really critical to provide capacity in the schools. So we would like to limit how many times we impact a particular child's or family's schools.
Because we're looking at a major change once that happens, although that's pretty far down the road, I think.
Well, that's why we're saying let's start looking at it. And if we have some sense of how impactful it is, we may be able to determine that there's other areas of the county that aren't going to be so impacted, and we should go ahead with some boundary changes there.
I see that you like the liaisons to the Planning Commission and that's Ms. Palchuk and myself. You'd like us to take to them streamlining the zoning and review process. I'm happy to do that. We have a meeting coming up with them in July.
We have a meeting tomorrow night with the schools committee.
Oh.
Yep.
I'm sorry, tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tomorrow night is our next one.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
and another in July.
And another in July, right. So as far as bringing them, it says bringing them in line with other county organizations like the Park Authority. Could you just give me a thumbnail of the difference in terms of time, or would we save a lot of time if we had the same process that the Park Authority had?
Staff has conveyed a sense that, when the schools come in to request a change of some sort, at Oakton, for example, they needed to come in and do, I think, a rezoning. They're treated just like any other developer coming in off the street.
Yes, that's what we keep hearing. Yeah, that we're just anybody. Yeah.
But when the parks come in, they seem to have some sort of a streamlined process to get some things done. So it's an issue we would like you to address with planning and zoning as to.
Well, we can certainly talk about that tomorrow night.
And I agree. I also think definitely at our leadership level, I think Dr. Brabrand's work with Mr. Hill is also critical.
Okay. Do we have any sense of how much time it would save us if they had the exact same process as now? Is this officially it's faster for the Park Authority, or is it kind of unofficially?
If you look in the CIP, there is a gap between the planning and the construction.
Right.
And that gap is waiting for approval from the
Right.
county.
Right.
So what they are doing, and I can't tell you what the time difference would be, but what they are doing is treating the schools as an outsider as opposed to a part of the county.
Okay.
And all we're saying is treat us as
Treat
part
us
of
the
the
same.
county.
I
You've got
certainly agree.
libraries,
Yeah.
you've got
Yeah.
police stations.
Well, I certainly agree, and I hope we can get that accomplished. As far and just the last comment I have, and I don't know if you'll have any reaction to this, but we did just get more money for capital, and that was much appreciated. We're going to have an ongoing tension, though, with renovations versus additions versus major maintenance, and it would be hard for me to say slow down some of the slow down some of these things when we've just gotten a bit of a boost, but I know we're trying to do it all. So thank you.
Okay, Ms. Schultz?
So that's a perfect leap because really the impressions that I've gotten from some of the FPAC conversations and then some of the CPDC conversations is that sort of second class, citizen, status in our conversations around, capital infrastructure as us as a board versus on the planning side. And I think the good work began this year. Dr. Brabrand, your work with the county executive is laudable in that regard. And I think the beginning of the conversation and the nature of the conversation has changed. But I think what we're seeing is on the ground, the practicality is that gap between a bond and planning and then construction is the reason why some of our lead times are so long. And I do think that latter part, can you go to your just previous slide, that the latter part of the CPDC, and that's part of the July work session that we've asked for time to bring a recommendation, is the need to focus. I mean, we're going to breach, I think, 190,000 students this fall, and where you put them. I mean, initiate activities for the Western High School. If I recall correctly, Ms. Hogan, I recall that Mr. Plattenberg told us that was like a 2028. I mean, we're not even going to talk about it for 10 years. We're dying. We got some, I think Centerville High School is at like 137% capacity. So, I mean, initiating is such a far cry from, but the one that's going to scare everyone is that little sub-bullet right there that says prepare for significant boundary changes. I mean, that's a strap in, people. I can't even, honestly, that is a terrifying concept. And if we have to do it in conjunction with and working at the same time with the county executive and talking about capital monies and everything else that's going on, it's enough to make your head spin. So it's wading into this, I think, is going to be very, very complex. At the same time that we have aging facilities. I mean, people, everybody may have something else that keeps them up at night. This keeps me up at night, is aging facilities, aging infrastructure, growing population, is the population where the seats are, trailers, at 1.5 million square feet of infrastructure. What do you get the sense? And you may not even want to go there, and I'll give you a get out of jail free card if you want. But when you say, as a group, prepare for significant boundary changes, what kind of scope or magnitude can you even begin to put language around that on for us?
If you look at where we recommended that new high school go in the western part of the county, and you say, well, how does that ripple across? you can see the impact
Can
rippling.
you describe that just for, because you and I
Okay.
know what we're talking about, but people who may watch this afterwards may not.
Okay. So from the far western part of the county, and you start looking at the high school boundaries if you draw a boundary for the new high school, just north of Dulles, right? So that would start impacting the next high school boundary and the next going eastward, and would actually provide eventually some relief in the Tysons area for high school students by just shifting all those boundaries. Then you also have a sort of southeastern shift that can start to help Westfield and Centerville and on down that direction. So you have a small piece of the county, a section of the county that's sort of over in the southeastern area, down toward Mount Vernon, that direction, that may not be impacted, but could be. And certainly within those high schools, what the ideal situation would be that a high school has middle schools that are aligned in its pyramid and elementary schools. And so once you change a high school boundary, you start to impact middle school boundaries and elementary school boundaries. And our suggestion is let's try to get a handle on how impactful all that is going to be so that we don't go cleaning up boundary issues like islands and some of the other things that we have in past years suggested, and look instead at make sure we've got seats for the children, but don't just do some nice cleanup or even some pyramid alignments right now when those are likely to change soon. And 10 years sounds like a long way off. Part of the reason that it's in the CIP at 10 years is not our suggestion. That's because they know it's going to be difficult to do.
So, doing things like what and look, the CIP was a major improvement this year, but having the historical data, which I still am advocating for, getting in there, and then actually coming up with a plan, and it's going to, I think we're going to have to literally have a multi-year plan about how to even go about doing this, because you're going to have to alert and engage the public up front. You have 27.5 million square feet of infrastructure, and if you start talking, once that one sentence of prepare for significant boundary changes makes its way out there, people are going to want to know, what does that mean? And I do think getting a handle on these issues and putting some concrete plans in place ourselves about how we're even going to go about this, that work begins like yesterday.
Okay. Want to respond?
Just two quick things. One, I have shared with Brian Hill this fall all the concerns that you've shared around the permitting process on behalf of the school system. I don't have all the answers yet, but we got great progress on the CIP dollars. We got great progress on the budget, and I'm hopeful for similar growth. But it's just like trying to, it all doesn't get fixed in one day. It's culture change. It's collaboration. Are we just another client, or are we part of the one Fairfax? And how do we take that to this process? So I continue to have daily, weekly conversations with the county executive. This is one of the things that is still on our list to work through. And the other thing I just wanted to say, just for you all, I know I put a pause on boundaries. I told you I'm doing the work. Jessica's been up all night, all morning, all night, all morning, studying 70 plus other school districts. I'm going to bring you a plan. I told you I would. I'm going to. And yes, 10 years, but we're going to have to start building the groundwork. And I think if we do it this board, I don't remember this, by the way, as an interview question for the superintendency last year, but if we build the foundation now, even a tough process, if we build in the trust, the transparency, it will be easier. It's still going to be hard. Any boundaries are. But we're doing a complete review of best practices around the country instead of just saying, well, how has Fairfax always done it? And I think we need to be particularly sensitive because there are going to be multiple pieces in play as we start to even look at one new high school. And I was here when Westfields opened. It was in the early mid-90s. I was at Herndon, and oh my gosh, all the pieces. So we recognize it's important, and I'm not going to wait 10 years to have a plan.
Okay, just a little bit of history. I think it must have maybe 25 years ago when we would do a bond and it had both the planning and the construction money in it. We went to a 2-bond cycle. Part of it at the time was to be able to then have sort of shovel-ready projects, but then things slowed down, and we did some time ago, we went to the Board of Supervisors to ask for better treatment with permitting. We didn't get anywhere, so we've tried that. Time to run that one up the flag again. We save money if we could do that. Ms. Darnett Koufax.
I thank you, as always, for your insightful look at our system from a capacity. And so I think one of the things that you highlighted that was important to me, I really don't have any questions at this point. I'm still kind of analyzing it. But I think one of the important points you highlighted is in how we are going to work with this is we can't wait to align to the security enhancements to the renovation cycle, because that was listed in the preliminary set of recommendations, and that's not going to work. As you said, we are on a ridiculously long cycle. I think people, we hear that all the time. In 35 years, you think about it, we're so used to hearing it, but it's crazy long. And so particularly where there'll be security measures in place now, there may be enhancements later. So I think that has to be looked at separately. And I do really appreciate the CIP. I appreciate what we did based upon your recommendations last year, Dr. Brabrand, what you did. And I think, but one that reflects more capacity and major maintenance is important. And I guess for me, as Ms. Evans, I understand what you're doing and I understand what you're saying, but I also know, and I've heard from various staff and facilities, that maybe what we need to do, and Dr. Brabrand, this is one way to do it, is, have some kind of consultant come in and look at all of our boundaries and where we are, and that is the atomic, but it doesn't have to be the atomic bomb method. It can just be we're looking. It doesn't mean we're taking action, but it's going to happen. I mean, because the same thing, there will be another school. There's another school sited on the Route 1 area, and that will happen, and it's the same kind of fallout as you're saying. High school has a bigger impact because if it's an elementary school, it kind of, you just split the elementary schools in that area. With the high school, with the pyramid structure and where it goes and how it happens. So I think there may have to be some bigger thing like that. And has your committee, I think we've talked about this in years past, but maybe tell me what you think about that at this current point in time.
Well, the good news is that the data systems that the staff is working with now are coming to the point where they can help us automate some of the looks at what if we do this with the boundaries.
But that's a significant improvement.
Exactly. And having such a tool, and then there are people that know how to operate such tools to answer those questions. I think Jessica's doing a small area test to see what the data can tell and how it can help us with looking at boundaries. But eventually, I think we'll be at a point now where we've got our geographic systems and we know where every student is, that we can kind of tell the system to help us with looking at how to do some boundary changes and what if.
And Dr. Brabrand, when will your update be ready for us?
I asked that question in Cabinet today. I brought Jessica and Jeff to Cabinet. I'm like, I need a timeline. I'm looking at sometime in the fall. I think later than October is going to be too late. because I want you to have time to wrestle with it to begin to start to frame any boundary decisions that we would make as early as next year or the years ahead. So that's the timeline I have. And I think October. Frankly, I'm looking. We're booking up already in September and October, but that means just we have important work to do. And again, it will be in the fall. We'll have it by the fall.
Okay.
Let me just share one other thing, just for an elephant in the room, and I don't want to get into too much detail. Jeff and Marty were both going to be here today. Both of them had this afternoon personal issues came up, and I directed them to handle those personal issues, then not be here. So it's no disrespect to the work that FPAC is doing. I didn't want to call Jessica at 5 o'clock and say, I need you here. I knew you all did great work. And Jeff and Marty both briefed me on generally what you were going to say. So I'm sorry they couldn't be here, but they needed to be where they needed to be, and I wanted to respect their need to do that. And both are okay, but they both needed something, each of them separately, to take attention to. So thank you for indulgence with that.
Thank you, and thank you for not dragging Kevin and Jessica to yet another meeting.
Mr. Moon.
Thank you. Many of my questions have been already asked and answered. But let me ask a few questions regarding the significant boundary changes, starting with Western High School. Worries me, just like Mr. Schultz stated, that it is in there, especially because we believe in transparency. Whenever we do boundary changes, whether small changes or significant changes, we want to involve our community. When they see those, community gets riled up and ask us a lot of questions, and then they will start lobbying us. And if I'm not mistaken, if it is your recommendation for us to start preparing, start doing some work before we do actual boundary change work out there, isn't that like basically doing something twice? We have to involve, whenever we do something, we have to involve the community, even if we are just preparing for the significant boundary changes. Again, it might depend upon what you mean by preparing for. Is it mentally, or is it just actually doing the works and engaging the community? And I am not sure whether our staff will be mentally prepared or physically prepared to do that twice, or even the board members want to go through that twice. Once is hard enough. And that's one comment and question. Another comment is, and question is, I think you stated that, starting from, above Dulles, and then it might even go down to Tyson's Corner area to alleviate some overcrowding that's existing right now, or expecting more of that in the future. On the other hand, my political sense is this. People now want to be disturbed as much as possible, want to be left alone. You build a school in western part of the county, you take care of the problem just in the western part of the county. We may be slightly overcrowded in the middle portion of the county. Just leave us alone. Could be generally people's attitude. And if there's a problem at overcrowding in Tysons, build another school in Tysons. What do you say to that? Or go to a different problem. If you have to go high, go high. Because just leave us alone. I am happy. Our community is happy with our existing schools. I don't want the boundary to change for my kids or my grandkids.
Exactly. Dan?
So a couple things. With regard to why are we talking about this with a 10-year expectation about when the school is going to open? Well, it's for exactly that reason. We want to put a marker out that boundaries are going to change. They will. And the longer people have to prepare for that, the better. You're right. We don't know, which street is going to be in which boundary and which, districts are going to be affected. I don't think it's going to be an exercise of going through it twice. It's going to be an evolving process. And, should land become available in Tyson somehow for a school? great. But
70 acres, 80 acres.
exactly. But we don't see that as something that's going to happen. So we want to start this discussion now and just put people on notice that not only attendance boundaries but program boundaries will change too. So if they're used to getting a particular program from a particular school, that may not be sacrosanct as well. So the longer we talk about it, the more people are aware of it, they'll be able to make decisions accordingly.
Some of those decisions will be start lobbying school board members from day one for 10 years.
I mean, with all due respect, Mr. Moon, that's part of the position, I think, is that you take that input and...
okay. Good luck.
I have started to warn my community and been showing them the projective maps, and it helps, particularly with the youngest parents, and I say it's coming.
For the benefit of the large viewing audience, the reason we keep talking about the Western high schools, that's where we already own the land. And at $1 million an acre, it's very hard to find land in Fairfax County. We happen to have enough land to build a modest high school in that position. Is it exactly where we would want to build a new high school? Maybe not, but it's where we have the most feasible option at this moment.
And Charlie's already suggested that when Bloomingdale's closes, that we take it over, including their parking garage, and build the high school. So, opportunities may open in Tyson.
Do we need 2 Macy's?
Okay, Ms. Keys-Gamara.
Okay. Well, let me start with just the charge. I'm comfortable with, and I'm charged. I'm gonna channel my Miss Schultz right now. But the charge that we have for long range vision for FCPS school facilities, I'm very comfortable with that. But it looks to me like some of what is included in the larger document, I'm not sure how it fits within the current charge. This looks like an expansion to me when we start talking about boundaries and that sort of thing. Are you guys not seeing it that way? When I read this, I felt like, especially being a CPDC committee member, and this is the first time that I've seen. I'm not sure if I missed a meeting, but I don't think I did.
CPDC doesn't do the charge for FPAC.
I understand that, but there was no discussion of these things in CPDC. So, was this intended to ask for additional authority?
No, but boundaries are where we started.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So boundaries are, we always feel like that was what we were initially told to go deal with. So from the beginning, we've always considered those from a facility perspective, not where the programs are located, right, but where the schools and how many schools and how big the schools and how do we get the children that we have into seats in those schools. So that's part of it. So the way our report is constructed, each part of our charge, mm-hmm, we've got what we did for that and what our recommendations are. And in the back, there's the more detail. So we try to focus on our charge. Now, safety and security was not in our charge this year, but it's really important. So we highlighted that up front and said we'd like to look at that next year.
Okay. I will say that I was very glad, Dr. Brabrand, when there were a number of requests to change people around. I think it was for Rolling Hills. Am I saying the name? Rolling Valley. There were a number of requests to change that, and I think the piecemeal definitely is not the way to go. I totally agree with that. But I do think that we need input from a number of, because as you said, this is huge that we're going to be dealing with. So we're probably going to need that consultant. We're going to need the staff. We're going to need community input, and I have no problem with certainly alerting the community as gently as we can, because I'm not sure I want to hear about it for the next 10 years either. But so we'll deal with that. With respect to the Planning Commission, my recollection is a lot of our direction came from the board members. And so I would encourage us to continue along the veins of, if we can get a charge from the board members to the Planning Commission, that is the surest way to address it. And there has been efforts in the last years when I was on the Planning Commission to streamline the comprehensive plan and reduce the amount of time and that sort of thing. So I would like to take a more inquiring approach, because I think it may ruffle feathers less, and I'd like to see it be successful. I agree it probably needs to happen. I didn't see a lot in this report that told me, gave me a clear comparison of how the park authority may have an advantage as opposed to the school system. I've certainly heard it anecdotally, but I don't recall. Right. So I think we need to do a little bit more investigation there, and I would take the route of working through the Board of Supervisors, because I think we have a number of people on the Board of Supervisors who are very pro-school. And this may well be something that just hasn't been brought to their attention, and they would very much want to support us. I also think that it's consistent with One Fairfax, and so it's certainly something we want to bring up. But I'm looking at this as more comprehensive, because I do think it's going to be a lot of long-range planning, and we're certainly going to need staff to help us.
Ms. Palchuk?
Thank you. It's been a long evening, but I agree with a lot of what my colleagues have said. I do want to thank you for your work on this. As you know, when we sit with the Planning Commission, it is kind of that things are coming to them from, they're appointed by their Board of Supervisor members. So I do agree that we need to have both at the staff level that conversation. We can obviously bring it up, but it really does need to get to kind of that decision level. Actually, something we hear from developers as well, just the lack of predictability. So I don't know, have you been able to get a sense of, or do we know the cost of that process, or I guess what the possible savings to our system would be to improving the permitting plan? Do we have a sense of the money around that?
Yeah, I don't know specifically the dollars. Mr. Sneed may have a sense of that better than I do. I do know that at Oakton, it caused a significant delay. And so just, as costs and materials increase over time, I'm sure it was fairly significant.
Right, because my understanding is, if you look at the cost of, I don't know, if we're looking at $10 million, that if it takes 2 years, I don't know if we're looking at that point at, relatively low interest rate, like the amount of time that we are spending and the cost to not fixing that. So if we have, that's the kind of information, if we can get it from Kevin or Jeff, and for you to be able to advocate, this is our money, this is the county's money that's being wasted on this permitting, right? So I know we're not doing next steps, but I would love, thank you. I appreciate that. Same thing with, I know it's difficult. I know we're looking at the nuclear option. Again, right, other systems do it differently. People who've come from other systems are always shocked at how we do ours. Like anything, culture change is hard. It's going to be very, very, very hard, very challenging. So I don't know that we have a right answer of when we do it, how we do it, but the more information we can gather and look at best practices in other systems, I look forward to seeing that report and to starting to see how we do that. I do have some questions, I guess. I would like to know more, maybe from you or from staff, of your recommendation to not do some of these minor changes in the meantime. That's challenging in some areas, and that might mean more kids in trailers. So what does it really mean for 10 years or longer to not be doing those smaller boundary changes? I guess I'd like to get your feedback on that and possible impact.
Well, certainly things that need to be done should be done. But what we're saying is don't do the things that are nice to have. Like, let's align this pyramid. Let's get rid of this attendance island. Let's do these things just to do those things. If there's a driving reason behind it, we're not, objecting to that. But some of the things, when you look at how the school system is laid out in terms of attendance boundaries, there's some obvious things that just look odd, and they should be fixed. But maybe they're not important enough to fix when we know that some other significant changes may be coming. So that's where we're looking at it. We're not saying put an end to it or stop them or anything like that.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I have some schools with 127% capacity, right? So that makes a little more sense. I can get on board with that. And then just finally, I appreciate your feedback on the, I guess, sort of next steps for us as we look at having our more energy efficient buildings, of not just looking at the behavior. And you gave us some options, and I would like us to explore that some more through that NIST partnership or the Virginia. I think that's something I would like us to get a better sense of. I know that staff is coming to us with a report requested, but what are some kind of possible next steps? So if you do have more information on that, that would be very helpful for us to share with staff.
So staff is already looking at the Virginia options, the things that are available in Virginia for energy contracts. And we will be working with Kevin and Jessica in the fall with the idea of the NIST demonstration project, and maybe give them more information so they can kind of see where we can go with that.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for your continued work. Really appreciate it.
Ms. Hines?
Thank you. So a couple things. I do think it's very helpful to go out front on the fact that we may have major boundary changes in 10 years. And I think, if nothing else, just to sort of give the community notice and to have our processes and our priorities in place before we start to do that, right? I mean, I would love to see just a headline in the Washington Post that says, if you buy a house in Fairfax County, don't expect your kids to go to that school 10 years from now. Because I think we do have a culture of, and we see it in Vienna, people who walk into the boundary change meeting and don't even have kids in the school yet, and they want to argue with us about whether or not their house should be boundaried in or out. We have created this expectation, that come heck or high water, if you're at that address, your kids will go to that school, and it's just not going to be possible anymore in this county that's growing so quickly, where land is so expensive. Things are just going to change. And I think parents and homeowners have to be alerted to all of that. So on the question of having processes and priorities in place, I know we're working on that. Sorry. I know. One of the things that I don't think we've mentioned it yet tonight, and I just think we should every time we talk about boundaries, is to make sure that in our priorities, there's a lot of things we think about when we do boundaries, right? But we definitely want to have equity and integration pretty high in those priorities, right? Because we can very easily lose that. I mean, we have examples. I mean, Langley High School kids who were taking a bus ride clear across the top of the county, right? Maybe because they didn't want to go to a different high school back when.
No, actually it wasn't. It was because Herndon was overcrowded.
Okay.
And they had to make an adjustment between Herndon High School and Langley High School in order to make room for all the growth in Herndon. They adjusted the Herndon and the Langley boundary. But I've warned Langley, sorry, a big chunk is going to get reboundaried. I've already told them that.
Well, the rumors about that are what they are, though. There are assumptions made about why we make certain decisions. And I think if we don't make very clear that, equity and integration are a big part of what we do. Right. So anyway, one last thing, the NIST. Do you know, just off the top of your head, does that include alternative energy ever?
I'm not sure what the demonstration project is about, but we have one or two members on our committee that are familiar with opportunities there that we can dig into a little bit more.
Yeah, the concept is a high performance building, so I assume that energy is part of that performance metric.
Ms. Corbett Sanders.
So glad I am following Ms. Hines because you addressed two of my questions. One is whether or not the NIST grants could have sustainable energy. I could see ourselves doing a trial for one of our newer technologies that we just made some modifications in the CIP, so that would make sense. So if you could make sure that Mr. Sneed has that information, I think it would be great. It would be helpful. And then on the concept of major boundary changes, we really have to have, as a board, a discussion about what are our priorities in boundaries and how those priorities reflect the one Fairfax. Because what we're talking about, many of these boundaries go back to 1985 and have been, protected ever since. And we have situations where you have overcrowding. But the other piece of it is, in addition to boundary discussions, looking at our programming in buildings to determine whether or not the capacity constraint is caused by the programming that's in the building, and whether or not that programming is core to the main purpose of that building. And so we do need to take a look at how we, if we have to move programs, we should consider moving them until such time that we have a fuller discussion about boundaries across the county. I don't know where you all are at on that. What do you think?
Well, programs are clearly off our charter, so we don't expand to that, but the impact of the programs on the facilities is dramatic, and on transportation.
Great. And then the last is on the safety piece. You should know that when we had the discussion at the work session on safety and security, this board did raise the issue of a school-by-school look at safety, especially with some of the unique designs of our high schools. Some create more of a challenge than others, and so we're glad you mentioned it, and that was one of the follow-on items at our last work session.
Great.
Mr. McElveen.
Thanks. So your recommendation on moving forward on energy savings issues was framed in the positive, but can we interpret it as a negative? Not a negative recommendation, but a negative commentary on synergistic?
I don't think so. The school system has benefited in some ways from that effort. And what we're saying is as it comes to the end of the contract period, we think that the school system could benefit better by taking those lessons learned and keep on doing those things, but then to move to looking at how can we adjust some of our facilities and our major systems to take advantage of energy savings capabilities that are on the market today.
But to be clear, you're telling us not to renew the synergistic contract.
I think we would say that.
Okay. And then my second question goes to the issue of solar, which, I don't think appeared prominently in here, but as you know, Ms. Hines and I have had some advocacy on the board on this issue, and I know from our past meetings in FPAC years past, we had heated discussions on that. I just wanted to know what you guys are thinking, if staff has spoken with you about any plans on that front.
We hear too much from Mr. Sneed about roofs and the maintenance of roofs and how much it costs to maintain and have them not leak. And sadly, because we don't have land except for playgrounds and parking, The obvious and somewhat logical place to put solar panels is on the roof, and it's just always a conundrum as to how to marry the wishes of the solar panels with the practicality of putting holes in the roof to secure them, because they have to be secured, and it's a challenge.
Yeah, and I think currently it is a challenge, but we have to talk about how we're building our roofs, if that's the problem. And I think the advocacy groups would agree with that. And I think and this advocacy is not just coming from the school board. The students are very passionate. They've come to speak at our meetings. I'm sure many of you have witnessed them. And so this is something, as a board, I'm hopeful that we'll keep pushing on and find workaround for the roofs. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz?
Just a couple of quick things. I didn't mean to bring or connect or create a nexus where there is none, that a 2028 plus West County or Western High School is the impetus or is the beginning or the demarcation of any boundary changes. I don't think that, and I don't think that you were implying that that it would happen 10 years from now. I actually think that part of what I'm hearing is you have to create space where space is, or you have to appropriately boundary. And I'm concerned about the discussion, and I am concerned, and this, Dr. Braybrand, that there was sort of this extemporaneous stoppage of boundary light without really talking to the board. And the reason I have that concern is the whole reason the previous board to this one created boundary light was to allow us to not become feet in concrete, and that you handle the small things as they come along, as the division had previously had a history of never getting to things, because it was always somewhere on a queue or on a list so far down that we would never get to fixing split feeders. And so it was a strategic decision of the board to actually go through the process of creating the boundary light to keep cleaning things up while we continue to work towards the big things. But if everything stalls, then nothing moves, and we're never going to be able to, whatever the significant boundary thing that has to be done, you're not going to be able to do it in one fell swoop. You're not going to be able to just say, we're going to peel every single person's boundaries away from them, and we're going to reboundary the whole division starting next year. I mean, that is an impossible task. And so I worry that we're, on the one hand, tacitly saying, oh, yes, we shouldn't do anything, and then on the other hand saying it's going to be in 10 years. The thing is that this beast has to keep moving. The trains have to keep moving. Housing is continuing to be developed. Land is being gobbled up. Mr. McElveen, made comment on something we did the other day about, that the Northern Virginia training site is going to build a retirement home, and that's kind of right in the middle of where, boy, it would have been great to have a wraparound services school, community, something, and those opportunities are disappearing rapidly. I mean, one of the pieces of property that I advocated that we get was right there on Fairfax County Parkway at Braddock. I mean, that was prime spot, and that place is gone. So this isn't getting better by the day. It's getting harder and more complex. And so I just, I actually think that we ought to reconsider starting. I mean, I appreciate that you didn't want to do a boundary light, and that's a whole different topic, but we can't stop the trains. And so the question's going to be, out of this, what is going to be the response of the administration in face of the board's committee coming forward and recommending and knowing we've got these problems? And I think there actually has to be a plan to do the plan. That's my hope, is that there's going to be something out of this to go, look, we really have to strategically, as we do our strategic plan, we have to strategically approach how we handle our facilities, how we handle our relationship and conversation with the Board of Supervisors and in terms of access, how we maybe access money outside the stream that is known to get to maybe public-private partnership money, and be more innovative with, did you say $1 million an acre? That made me a little sick. I mean, the specter is out there, but we can't just keep talking about the specter. We need to plan now, and we need to do it for 10 years out.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
I thought Dr. Brand was about to say something. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I think I kind of agree with you, Ms. Schultz. I really want to advocate for a comprehensive approach, even if it's in stages. But what I have a problem with is when we get involved in, you get a community and they may not see the whole picture or the ramifications of how they can impact another community, and then it creates problems that we have to come back and clean up. That's where I think we run into problems. And so that was the impetus behind the comments that I made earlier. But I absolutely believe that this has to be comprehensive. It has to bring all the stakeholders together. It has to bring the experts and the staff and community members. Everybody needs to come to the table to talk about it, because it is, we first of all need to define what our values are, and this is a part of that communication piece, that hammer that you love for me to swing. I know you don't, but I'll just be sarcastic about it. But we're also educating the community as we go along that this is what we're thinking about. This is what we believe is important. We do think equity is important. We do want to make sure that these programs are available to every part of our community. We do want to make sure that every child has a similar opportunity. And we're looking at these, and this is how we're making those decisions. I think that's the kind of transparency we really want to promote, at least from my view. I am a little concerned about one sentence in here where it says no boundary changes except for extreme overcrowding. I think that's kind of counter to what I just said, and so for that reason, I do think that there are considerations as we go and we come up with a plan and include everybody, but I'm not sure that it will always simply be overcrowding. So I just want to make sure I clarify that.
Evans?
Thank you. I just have a quick go back. One thing that I had meant to ask you about it, and I want to go back to where it is so I get the exact language, is about 21st century learning and planning for that. I think it's in page 18 of your report, where you say FPAC. I'm sorry? Oh, electronically, I think it's on 18, sorry. So 17, yeah. Thank you. FPAC is not convinced that FCPS is well prepared to build or renovate schools to meet the 21st century requirements that are articulated by facilities and instructional services staff. And then you do list Bailey's Upper, which has been a very successful design. And TJ has unique 21st century features, but and then you put a price tag on that it added about $15 million to that renovation to add those. So I just wanted you to speak to that a little bit more, why you feel we're not prepared to develop 21st century learning facilities, and what should we be doing to do that?
What we have found is that there are pockets of ideas, but there's not that we've talked with Dr. Duran, but we have not discovered that there's a deliberate process that says how is teaching and learning going to change for our school facilities in the future. And so the concern that we have is that schools are being renovated every day, and new ones come on the queue as we go along, and they're being built to the ed specs that we have in place now that don't really speak to the 21st century designs that might be needed. We're not saying what those needs are, but at TJ there was an opportunity to put in some things that other schools don't have. There was an opportunity at Bailey's to do some creative things that other elementary schools, when they're renovated, are not getting. So the question is, what are those things, and should we be including them in the ed specs, or should we be building flexibility into the building so that we can move a wall or do whatever we need to do as things change?
I think that's an absolutely critical question. And I'm particularly interested in it because this fall, finally, we will be putting together a plan for Falls Church High School and our last legacy high school. So that might be an opportunity, but I won't pursue it anymore tonight, but I would love to get your thoughts on what that should look like. Because that's a whole different way of thinking, really. If we do have the ed specs. We have the ed specs, and that's what guides us. If we need to be thinking completely differently, now having to add $15 million to every project doesn't look like something that is perhaps viable. But if we can do it at TJ, perhaps we need to be doing it at our large comprehensive high schools in the future as well. So thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, I think we've come to the end of the commenters. Thank you all very, very much. We really do appreciate your work. And again, when this year's CIP was developed, I think we all very much appreciated the new approach. And it certainly helps the community see, particularly when you look at the maps, be able to see sort of the trends in overcrowding or undercrowding where there's space, so that when the community looks at the prospect of change, they can kind of see, yes, it is going to come, and you can kind of see where it's going to come, so that it encourages people to take a more holistic, realistic look at it. I found this was the first time I could take that CIP out and I could show them the Hutchison site and say, and what do you think is going to happen? And they very quickly go, oh, yes. And then they ask, and will it affect my child? And I said, well, how old is your child? But change is clearly coming, and with the growth coming, and the Silver Line and the Route 1 and Centerville overcrowding and the various others, we're going to have to address it. Dr. Braybrain, did you have
I wasn't going to
final
say
word?
anything, but I think I will, just as I think about this is Fairfax County. People, listen. This was a great conversation. One, I want to be clear. I'm bringing you a plan this fall around boundaries. Not next year, not 2 years from now, not 10 years from now. I am bringing you a plan this fall that can help us start to have the foundation. And as I shared with you guys a few months ago, under the context of One Fairfax. And that may mean us looking at multiple things, far deeper and richer than we've ever looked at before. You know, I remember when I was on leadership, I don't know how long have you all been around FPAC? Is it 8 years? I was on the leadership team when FPAC started, and I was like, FPAC, and it was, I'll be honest, oh my gosh, I love you guys. Because honestly, you're not having to deal with what people were honest tonight. One of the hardest things a school board member or a superintendent has to deal with is school boundaries. And you heard the political pressures are real. It can be a game changer for people who sit around the table, everyone who sits around the table. And it's not something to take lightly when you put up any words about boundaries, because it does bring concern. And in many communities, it's been disruptive and divisive, including in this county years and years ago. And that's one reason why boundaries have really been like a third rail. But I want to leave you some hope it's 5 minutes before 10. One, we can finish before 10 and have only a 13-hour day. We move lots of kids outside of their neighborhood boundary right now, and they willingly go. We do. But they go because they believe there's something somewhere else that is of high quality and better. When we have that excellence in every neighborhood school, we can do a, relatively speaking, smoother, less contentious boundary study. But in a county where people believe inequity exists, you are going to continue to have people fight to say, are we one Fairfax, or I'm in my Fairfax, and my Fairfax is only my boundary. And I mean, right? You all hired me to name it. So that's the discussion. The good news is I heard many of you willing to start to put it out there tonight. We've just got to be honest with the community straight up about what we're talking about and what we're not. But the community has been willing to move beyond their own boundary if the quality was that good. If it's that good in every school, the boundary issue, the specter of changing boundaries becomes much, much less reduced. And that's why the equity work that we're beginning has got to accelerate in the years ahead, so that these issues, these differences that many of you come and talk about so passionately, are not near as broad as what people perceive them to be. So I left optimistic, and I really appreciate it. I just want to thank all of you. I don't know how many hours you all spend, but it's tremendous. And thank you. I was joking, Alan Griffith was on the Fairfax City School Board when I was a high school principal, and the people's time, so many of you have just committed years and years to this work, and I am truly grateful. And I think people in Fairfax don't always realize people like you behind the scenes who are being a big value added, and I'm very grateful. I thank you. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We are adjourned.